Todd, do you know if Dave is on his way? Todd, are you there? Oh, we'll see how this goes.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for joining.
Good morning, Todd.
Okay, and Dave has just been promoted, Kelly. So
Wonderful.
everybody is here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Craig.
You're very welcome.
Hello, Dave.
Hi.
Okay,
Thank you
Lisa,
for
we're at the
being
top of the hour. Would you like to wait another minute or two until we get started? Or are you ready to go ahead and get going? You're on mute, Lisa.
I will follow your lead
Okay,
today.
let's give it one more minute. We still have I think we still have some folks coming in.
Great.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Increasing Affordable Housing on Native Nations webinar. My name is Kelly Donnelly-Williams. I'm the Director of Human Services at the Maricopa Association of Governments. And we are really happy to be joined here today by our partners at the Arizona Community Foundation to bring you this webinar today. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Lisa, with the Arizona Community Foundation, to also introduce herself.
Good morning. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time to learn about this important information. I'm Lisa Urias, the Chief Program and Community Engagement Officer for the Arizona Community Foundation. And it's a pleasure for us to partner in this work with MAG. We acknowledge that Maricopa County sits on the ancestral homelands of the indigenous nations that have inhabited this land for centuries, including the Akmera O'odham people and Pipash Maricopa people. A particular thanks to Amy St. Peter, the CEO of Maricopa Association of Governments, and Kelly Williams for their leadership in this discussion and the research that they've provided, and to our own Debbie Nez Manuel at the Arizona Community Foundation for her leadership in bringing some of these important experts like Todd Francis of Native Capital and Dave Castillo, who will be sharing their insights with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Debbie, would you like to also acknowledge the tribal lands for today, or are we covered?
I'm sure I'd like to acknowledge that. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
She send kinin telna bilni bashish chin sitna jini dasha chi trabahan dashanale. She ate toward the is a dead nasha. Quinda Cool Salt River Indian Community Shugan. Good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful to be a part of this vision that has really evolved into this conversation, and glad to be here. I am here in the Salt River Indian community, and glad to acknowledge all of our relatives here in Salt River who are Akimura Otham and Pipash, and all of our relatives who are here in Guadalupe and in Levine over on the west end of Gila River. I believe we have some of the tribal communities who are joining us today, and just want to acknowledge them and thank them. We know that that understanding our ties and our lineage to the ground that we walk on is really important. So thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. To begin this morning, we wanted to introduce our speakers and also talk a little bit about the format today. We will have 4 speakers talking to us and sharing their experience, their lessons learned in increasing affordable housing on tribal lands, both in Arizona and in other tribal communities across the nation. We wanted to let you know, if you are participating, to please put any of your questions into the Zoom chat. MAG staff will be monitoring the Zoom chat, and we will be directing those questions to each speaker. Each speaker will have a few minutes after their presentation to answer questions brought up by the audience. And if we are unable to answer those questions during our webinar, MAG staff will make sure to work with our speakers and other community resources to try to follow up with you. I also wanted to mention, for everyone who registered today, you will also receive a post-webinar survey to help us decide on topics related to increasing affordable housing on tribal lands for future conversations. And we would really appreciate your participation. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to complete that survey. And we will also be sending you a list of resources related to affordable tribal housing, and which was also helped put together by our 4 speakers today. So to begin, let me stop sharing my screen here for a second. I would like to introduce our speakers. We have Dave Castillo, who serves as the CEO of Native Community Capital, a 501c3 that focuses on with offices in New Mexico and Arizona. He's joined by his colleague, Todd Francis, who is also the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer with Native Community Capital. Further, we have Jody Moses, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Southwest Office of Native Americans Program Administrator, here to speak with us about federal funding, and Alexandra Terry, who is the Deputy Director for the Tohono O'odham Kiki Housing Association. She's going to share what they've done on their tribal lands to increase tribal housing as well. With that, I'd like to hand it over to our first speaker, Dave Castillo. Dave?
Here we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, and it's good to see Alex here. Geek Association is definitely a leader in affordable housing development, and it's nice to see you, Ms. Moses. I knew your predecessors. I look forward to getting to know you as well. My comments today are kind of to review some of the funding options at the national level and provide case studies, and I want this to be encouraging to you. The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996 was signed into law, and the rules and the negotiated rulemaking took place, and implementation began at the very beginning of my career. So I kind of grew up career-wise under this legislation that I think by all measures is landmark watershed piece of legislation that provides tribes new opportunities. And yet, despite the almost 25 years of having the law in place, there's still a lot of work to do. So this first slide, next slide, please. Do I manage it? Okay, there it is. So again, I just want to encourage you. I mean, you would expect that over 25 years that there have been some successful projects, and indeed there have been. There's a group called the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative that has done a really good job, I think, of documenting some of the successes that tribes have had across the U.S. in terms of leveraging financing and building homes that are the farthest thing from the cookie cutter approach prior to NAHASDA, and that, you know, most folks know as public housing or project housing. So you can take a look at that site. That's a good one to kind of take a peek at some real innovative ideas. Next slide. And this is one example that we were involved in, and kind of go into a little bit of detail of what the opportunities may look like for you wherever you're at in the industry, or public or tribal sector or nonprofit sector otherwise. So this is a 10-unit single family project with a small rural tribe. And, you know, when we look at this project, you know, these are modest homes, but they're well built. You know, there's a certain aspect to them that's really consistent with the tribe's cultural values and historic methods of building and living. And so you look at the structures, and it's beautiful. It's again well designed and appreciated by the community. But from an investor standpoint, from public sector, private sector, nonprofit, intermediary, and certainly from a tribal perspective, the beauty part of the project is really the capital stack here that you see in the corner. And I think what this suggests is, you can see here that the debt piece on this was very small. And what that means for any investor or any partner is that the risk then of default for this project is very manageable. The other thing that this suggests is that, you know, this tribe had to go to no fewer than 5 separate organizations or 5 separate review processes to put their plan forward. And each one of them agreed that the plan was well designed, that the risks were fairly evaluated, and the mitigants to that would possibly affect the success of the project were reasonable. And so the investments were made, primarily equity, right? These are grants mostly. We're the ones that put in the debt. So I think really what this suggests then is that for those tribes that have a good grant history, who can leverage those dollars, can achieve lower loan-to-value ratios and reduce the risk for everyone involved, while still building something that can scale, right? Yeah, I guess the other side of this too is that if we only use grant dollars, then it takes longer and we can only build so much. But if we can leverage those dollars and bring in other sources, which is what NAHASDA, at least one part of NAHASDA, really suggests, that you leverage your grant dollars, we can do much more sooner. So the options here on the left-hand side, the bullet points, is that public sector grants and credit enhancements are a good tool, and tribes have generally a good track record of using that tool. That native CDFIs are available. That's us, a little bit self-serving here, but we are a native CDFI construction lender and mortgage lender. And you know, you couldn't say this before NAHASDA. I mean, there just wasn't very much money flowing from financial institutions to tribes. There still aren't, quite honestly. The majority of regulated financial institutions will not finance construction on tribal trust lands. And that's where we come in, where we are, you know, we're that sucker that'll take the risk, right, to do the deal in Indian country. And it's not really a risk, because we know the landscape, we know the people, and we know how to structure the transactions in a way that essentially allow us to kind of continue doing this. And we've been doing it for the last decade. You know, $18 million worth of, you know, projects in Indian country. And that the conventional lender can kind of partner to provide permanent financing, and that the secondary market, and particularly their native initiatives, can help to grow that as well. And I think I'm probably missing, you know, the nonprofit sector and the role that they play. but it's similar probably to the public sector. I mean, historically, that's what's happened. We need more of that. Private foundations, community foundations, individual philanthropists, and others. I think the Native Americans Philanthropy noted that less than 1% of philanthropic dollars flow to Native-led organizations. And in this country, that just makes no sense. So we need them to be more present, just like we need the regulated financial institutions and banks to be more present, as well as other public sector entities. So next slide, please. Yeah, so if we have that as a backdrop, as kind of an example of what can be done, what's the problem? Well, there really is still a problem. This is kind of a literal example and also a metaphor, right? A lot of times tribal communities are just stuck in the mud for lack of an existing infrastructure. Now, in this case, right, the picture is physical infrastructure of roads, bridges, and whatnot to allow us to get kids to school, for goodness sakes, during inclement weather. But so too, if we're trying to build homes and build communities, we need the financial infrastructure, we need the legal infrastructure, we need the relationships and the precedent. I think the precedent is the biggest issue, right? Because as you see here, you can't see the graph too well, but this is a graph that we had produced in-house when I was at Fannie Mae. And then I think it was the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis reproduced this, and the numbers had not changed. It was the exact same graph. And what this shows is that the HUD 184 loan program, which is intended to stimulate mortgage lending on tribal trust lands, since its inception, has remained, stagnant or has been in decline. That's the black line, right? That's the dollars that have deployed to support mortgage lending on tribal trust land. And the red line, which has grown almost exponentially, is all those transactions that have been done off the reservation, right? Because the banks found a loophole, which is basically, as long as you serve a Native American, you can use this product. And the fact is that 78% of the Native population lives off reservation, but in counties surrounding their tribal homelands. And so Native Americans are benefiting, but we're not really addressing the real issue, which is building the infrastructure and creating the precedent for affordable housing and mortgage lending on tribal trust lands, which is what this legislation was supposed to do. And if not for this loophole, we may have gotten a lot closer. So that's kind of where the real situation remains, from a proportional standpoint. If all those beautiful homes that you saw at the beginning of the presentation, that's really a drop in the bucket. We need much more. And this graph kind of emphasizes that. Okay, next slide. And so what is so difficult? Well, our friends over at Enterprise Community Partners put together this little handbook. I used to have it next to me. And this is just an illustration, right? I mean, the challenge is that it's complex. Anyone who's done any kind of development knows that there's 100 moving pieces during the development process, and probably 1,000 different ways that a development can get sideways and get stopped in its tracks. And so what this suggests is simply that we need to organize, we need a partner, we need to create the infrastructure, build the partnerships, create the precedent. And that is the work that I think everyone on this call is called to do. That's the challenge. It's not rocket science, right? I say this all the time. We landed a man on the moon, we landed a rover on Mars, but we can't seem to put banks or enough affordable housing on Indian reservations. It's not because it's a technical issue. We know how to do this. Affordable housing development finance is probably the easiest form of finance compared to other types of financing. So it can be done, and for goodness sakes, here's a little handbook that can teach you how to do it. All right, next slide. So looking to federal initiatives, tribal initiatives, statewide initiatives. At the federal level, I think some of the things that we have to look forward to, and that I'm certainly encouraged by, is the HERO legislation of 2016, Housing Economic Recovery Act, and within that is the duty to serve provision. sometimes our friends in financial institutions won't do the right thing unless they're forced to. And this legislation absolutely forces them to. And so we're really encouraged by the potential of what comes out of the duty to serve provisions while the GSEs are still under conservatorship, and the goals that they can achieve. And we're happy to be a partner in that process. If y'all haven't seen the recent series by the Federal Reserve Bank system, they did a series on racism in the economy, which I thought was really enlightening and really, I think, educational and can provide a lot of insight as to the challenges at the federal level. And likewise, then there is a move to take a look and revise the Community Reinvestment Act. And that, again, is something that I think banks fear. And again, sometimes just what we need to get them to make commitments in those areas that are hardest to serve, which unfortunately is Indian country all day long. From the tribal perspective, again, you couldn't say this before NAHASDA as much. I mean, there were some really progressive tribal housing entities, but you've got these are just a couple that are here in Arizona. We have Alex that'll speak to us a little bit more on that bottom one, but the Keek Association has just done a tremendous job of reimagining and rebuilding that TDHE in order to provide some tremendous opportunities for their community members. And you've got, on the other hand, a very new organization up at Navajo that's engaged in self-help housing initiative, but I think brings a lot of promise. And again, it's this creative thinking. It's you're not just relying exclusively on the tribe to build the homes. There are grassroots organizations, nonprofit organizations, native CDFIs that are all engaged in helping to rebuild Indian country. And at the statewide level, I'm sorry, but I feel like I really should know more about this Affordable Housing Pre-Development Loan Fund and ADOH's Home Plus Mortgage Loan Program, but I just don't. I hope that folks on the call can kind of enlighten us as to what's been done with those, how much of those funds have been deployed to serve tribal members on tribal lands. If the number is zero, maybe that's not such a bad thing, because the only place to go from there is up, if you want to think of it that way. But I personally would like to know kind of where those funds are at and how tribes have been involved, and we're certainly happy to be a part of that process. Next slide. And I think this is my last one. The other thing, so the last thing I'll say is that I think there are tremendous opportunities to partner, to really look at, understand, and develop some partnerships. I don't mean to call Arizona out, but the fact is that New Mexico has a tribal homeownership coalition that operates under the auspices of their housing agency, MFA. South Dakota has a tribal homeownership coalition as well. Montana has a native homeownership coalition. And we here in Arizona have our very own Construction in Indian Country program out of ASU, and they'll be hosting their conference. They used to be on their board, so a little shameless plug here, but they will be having their conference here in May. And it's a great opportunity to come together with tribes, those that are involved in building homes and commercial facilities, and rub elbows and possibly develop some partnerships. So more than happy to kind of continue the conversation, to talk a little bit more about what we've done in New Mexico and elsewhere. We are a regional native CDFI, so we serve tribes throughout the Southwest, but I'm here in Arizona, so is Todd, and our other colleagues and team members are in other parts of the Southwest. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Todd for a discussion on some specific initiatives locally. Thanks.
You ready for me to take over? Okay.
Thanks so much, Todd. We'll have our
okay.
have your slides advanced.
There you go. Okay, thank you. So thank you guys for inviting us today. I guess the first thing I want to open with is what I'm presenting is really, just to kind of summarize up front, is we are actually working with tribes to get them to look at housing in a different way, given our current situation with COVID and so forth. Everybody knows that there is a housing issue across all reservations, including Navajo, where I'm from. There's a shortage of housing, cramped housing, and so forth. So, we're trying to speak to tribes in a way that gets them to recognize that, housing needs to be an essential component of building an economy. And that's usually how you're going to get attention from some of the leadership. They want to know, why does it make sense to invest in housing? It's because I think we all know here that they go hand in hand. Housing, if you build the houses, you create jobs. And if you are a tribe that can afford to be a lender and actually fund some of these housing developments and also maybe the mortgages, there's interest revenue to be earned on those mortgages. And so there's also income opportunity for the tribe. So I know Navajo, where I'm from, just to give you a quick example, Navajo has a trust fund of about $2.5 billion that has grown over the last 30 years. And they realize probably about $250 million in interest revenue off those funds yearly. And so those funds, that not the entire 250 million, but even a portion of it, if they were able to invest a portion of that unrestricted interest income in housing, whether it's single family homes or multifamily, that would go a long way toward making housing available for everyone. And that's another thing that I share with tribes is, there's right now we're at a point where, it's not just all about low income. Of course, these programs are important and critical to provide housing for low income families, but we also have moderate income families that are wanting to move back to the reservation, but they don't qualify for these programs, which are usually federally funded. And so they're left out trying to figure out their own housing situation.
Todd, can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Yeah.
Some individuals in the audience are having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Do you mind speaking up just a little bit?
Okay, let me move closer to the microphone here.
Thank you very much.
Is that better?
It is. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that, what I'm presenting is really trying to provide some solutions to overall housing for all income levels as well, not just strictly low income. And the first thing I want to go over is down payment programs. So there are funds available for down payment for tribally enrolled members. One of these programs is the Indian Housing Block Grant Program. And I don't think many people know that those funds can actually be used for down payment. And I'll just give you an example of a program that I ran probably 20 years ago now, when I was with another nonprofit, Trellis. I think most of you know Trellis. We applied for down payment funds and we were awarded those funds. And the funds were restricted to only low income, but they can also be used for moderate income families as well, up to 100% AMI. So I think if there are tribal people on the call, I think this is a good thing for them to know. I would ask questions to your Indian Housing Block Grant people to find out how you can make down payment available, because down payment, if you create it, like I said, you can make it available to low-income families as well as moderate income families. And here in the urban area, as we know, housing's gotten to be so expensive that that would be a good use of those funds to help the moderate income families living in the urban areas to get into their first homes. So I just wanted to make people aware that Indian Housing Block Grant funds can be used for down payment. Another source is CDBG funds. Actually, it's the ICDBG, Indian Community Development Block Grant Funds. Those funds, I've never worked with them myself, but there is a component that allows you to use some of those funds for down payment. I think, what is the amount here? Yeah, they can provide up to 50% of down payment to low to moderate income homeowners. So again, I just want to make people aware of those funds that they're available. And then because we're a CDFIs, across the country, especially the native CDFIs, we regularly get down payment funds, and they're made available. Usually they're restricted to certain states or certain regions, and so you'd have to follow up and check. And right now we actually have down payment funds available for families who live in New Mexico. We are exploring other opportunities right now for families who live in Arizona, but there are other nonprofits that also have down payment of funds available to everyone, not just Native Americans, but specifically the Native CDFIs will typically have funds available for Native enrolled members. I'm not sure why I put ARPA on here, but I just also wanted to highlight the fact that the ARPA Homeowners Assistance Fund is also available to people who already own homes. And if they are having trouble meeting their mortgage payments, that's another program that can be tapped into. I don't think many tribes are aware of this, so I just wanted to also share that information. The last item here, other federal, state, and private funds. Like Dave said, I think he mentioned the Home Plus or Home in 5 program on his slide. Those are a couple of other down payment programs. Home Plus is available in all counties throughout Arizona. Home in 5 is available in Maricopa County. And then we've got a couple more in Pima County, the Pima Tucson Home Buyers Solution Program and the Home Down Payment Assistance Program. So those are available to Pima County residents. I wasn't able to find too many other programs. Those are the 4 that I identified, just asking around and looking online. But another popular one is the IDA program. That's an individual development account savings program. And that's a program where homeowners are able to save money toward down payment on a home, the purchase of a new home. Some programs are more generous than others, but I'm familiar with a program that matched $3 for every $1 saved by the prospective homeowner. And I think they were matching, if you saved $5,000, they were prepared to match $15,000 so that you would have $20,000 as a down payment for a home. So those program rules vary, but that's just an example of the type of down payment that is out there for the tribal people who are on the Zoom call today, just so that you're aware of that. The other thing, the last item is the HUD-approved counseling. I wanted to bring that up because in order to take advantage of these down payment assistance programs, homebuyer education is always required. The programs want to make sure that the recipients are aware of how the programs work, and they know what their responsibilities are as a homeowner. Whether they're just now purchasing it, or maybe they're in the home and they run into problems and they're facing foreclosure at some point. They're made aware of programs that are available for them if they get into that situation. So that's the purpose of the homebuyer education, is to just educate the homebuyer up front so that they know what they're getting into. But the other thing about the housing counseling that I wanted to mention is that a lot of homebuyers, new homebuyers, especially from the Native community, low-income community, have a hard time even qualifying for a home. And this is my experience when I was running the down payment program that I just mentioned earlier. Just roughly 1 in 10 people who applied for the program qualified. So that means that 9 out of 10 did not qualify, and for the most part, it was because of credit issues. And so those clients, they probably weren't going to be able to become a homeowner for maybe a year to 3 years out, because they had so many credit issues to work on. And that's another thing that the tribal people on the line should recognize, is that that's a major obstacle to homeownership in Indian country. financing, getting into a mortgage. All these things are pretty new concepts to Indian country. And so that's what the class is for, is to educate people about what's involved. And then if they do have credit issues, they can work with the counseling agency to improve their credit score so they can qualify for a mortgage. But it's expensive. It's really expensive to run a housing counseling program. And I would encourage tribes to try to use programs that are already out there. HUD has a publicly available listing of local HUD approved counseling agencies. And so I would encourage tribes to have their members enroll in programs that are listed on that HUD approved list. Next slide, please. All right, so the single family housing development financing options. So this is basically, I guess, a slide for, again, tribal organizations who want to develop single family homes on reservation. And one of the examples that I want to cover is by a tribe in New Mexico. It's the San Felipe tribe, who used, it was HUD Title VI a loan guarantee program to finance basically a subdivision on the reservation. And I think it was roughly, about 140 units that they built out. And they used that HUD Title VI loan program to get a loan from Bank of America. And they were able to start the, phase the subdivision where they were able to use some of that loan money to build out the first phase, which I think was about 40 units. And then at some point, they qualified tribal members to actually occupy those units. And the tribal members qualified for 184 loans in order to get into those homes. So the 184 individual mortgage was provided to the tribal member, and the proceeds that were collected from the homeowners who took out the mortgages, individual mortgages, the proceeds paid off that HUD Title VI loan. And so it was a very successful example of how a tribe took advantage of this HUD Title VI loan guarantee program to build out a pretty decent sized subdivision. And this particular program that I'm talking about allows tribes to get a 95% loan guarantee by HUD. So Bank of America, I'm sure, made them comfortable. The maximum loan term can be 20 years on this loan. And the tribe can also use the Indian IHBG funds. So that's the down payment that I mentioned earlier, the Indian Housing Block Grant funds that are given to tribes yearly. The tribe can use those funds to make the interest and principal payments until they figure out what the takeout financing source is going to be for them. So that's an attractive option because the Title VI program actually allows tribes to borrow up to 5 times their housing needs. So that can be huge for some tribes. And if you get a large allocation like Navajo, Navajo gets about 77 million, or that they got 77 million in 2021. And if you can use that, or a big chunk of that, for principal and interest payments, you can create a lot of single family housing on reservations. So it's a way to get to the scale that I think a lot of tribes are looking for. So I think that's something. There's a model out there. There's other models I'm sure that have been successful, but I just wanted to highlight that one. Other financing options, CDFIs fund construction for single family homes. I'll give you another example of this. So NCC is located in Laguna, New Mexico, and the tribe there funds their own construction financing for their tribal members, and they use us as a CDFI to make that happen. We originate the loans and we do the draws for the families, and that's all tribal money. So tribes, if they have a CDFI, they can work with this CDFI to make that sort of thing happen, or they can find another CDFI who'd be interested in working with them to help facilitate that, help them deploy money that they want to put into their housing effort. Let's see, the other item here, other private options for single family include, like I said already, is the Section 184 that can be used as a takeout source if tribes are using the loan Title VI loan program. And then we also have, everybody's familiar with LIHTC, the low income housing tax credit program that can be leveraged for single family. There's also the USDA rural development funds. Indian Health Service has funds, and they can use their funds for water and sewer. So if you qualify, that can help pay for that aspect of a single family development. And then also some tribes have actually explored bond financing as well. I don't have an example of that, but I know that there's been a lot of interest in that. So if that hasn't been brought up, that's an idea you might want to explore. You can go to the next slide now. All right, so multifamily. So I just added this because we have a lot of recent interest from tribes wanting to figure out how to finance multifamily projects. We have the traditional ways which are listed here, like the 184 example. You can do what I explained. You can do the same thing with a multifamily project. It doesn't have to be single family. You can finance it with the Title VI loan guarantee, and then take out the units with 184 financing. You have LIHTC, you have new market tax credits if you have a commercial component to the multifamily project, and then again bond financing. And let's see, the last item on here, tribal enrolled members as lender investor. I think I mentioned that already, where tribes are there are quite a few tribes who have the wherewithal, financial wherewithal to be their own lender. And that's actually something that we're exploring right now with a couple of tribes. Like I said, Pueblo of Laguna is an example for single family, but we also have a couple of other tribes that are looking at doing a similar thing with multifamily, funding these projects themselves, or to the extent that they need to with the leverage funding that's available. But a lot of projects are restricted. If you use federal funds, they're restricted to pretty much low income projects, and tribes are wanting to provide housing for a broader spectrum of borrowers, including the moderate income. And so that's why tribes are looking at funding some of these deals with their own money. And so that's another way to get it done, is to take a look at being your own banker for some of these tribes. And the last thing is fee simple land acquisition. It's hard to do multifamily on trust land sometime and make it happen quickly. And so another option that we've been looking at is acquiring fee simple land near the reservation, up in Navajo where I'm from, purchasing fee simple land next to the reservation and doing a multifamily project on that area. So that's another way to get it done, an easier way to get it done if tribes are willing to spend the money to purchase the land to make a development like that happen. So we're just basically looking at a lot of options for tribes and trying to get them to think, trying to get all of us to think differently about how to pursue housing options, whether it's multifamily or single family. That's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Todd. We really appreciate the information you had to share. Let's see, it looks like we have one question. We have a question from Joanna Carr, who's with the Arizona Housing Coalition. She said, are there any resources for developers on tribal land to receive technical assistance or consultancy around building the financial plan for projects?
So you're talking about like technical assistance for a developer that's already doing development or is wishing to do development on tribal lands?
I would suspect it's the latter. Someone who hasn't developed on tribal lands previously.
Well, I mean, I think if LIHTC is a model, right? I mean, a new applicant for the low-income housing tax credit program can't truly apply unless they have a partnership with an experienced developer. So I think there's been a lot of tinkering. There's been a lot of folks that have come to Indian country, kind of selling them, you know, kind of their product. And so I think tribes are generally careful about who they engage. There is an initiative through a group called RCAC out of California. They have something called the Tribal Housing Excellence Academy, which is a 5-week intensive training on development financing on tribal trust lands. It's the only program of its kind that exists that I know of. I mean, you could go to the Urban Land Institute, you can go to NeighborWorks, you can go to any of these large national intermediaries and get a certificate of development financing, but they won't address the issues of development on tribal trust land. So the Academy and the folks at RCAC might be a good source. Generally speaking, though, tribes will submit a request for technical assistance from ONAP, the Office of Native American Programs, and they'll get paired with technical assistance provider. That's typically how a tribe would get the technical assistance to do that. And then there's the National American Indian Housing Council, which provides technical assistance as well. But generally speaking, if you're looking to do work in Indian country, you should be partnered with a tribe and you know, the experts there in the community. And there are some non-tribal organizations, like I mentioned, that provide some of that training.
Thank you, Dave. We did post the link to the Tribal Housing Excellence Academy in the chat for anybody who might be interested in reviewing that. And we did have one other comment during your presentation. It is not, it's not a question, but I thought I'd read it. It's from Barbara Pulley. She said, good to hear there are possible funds for moderate income. They could become the models for lower income to consider applying. They could also be the trainers to help understand what all these funds could mean to a family living on the reservation, where loans are still new to many Native people. Advocating and taking the fear out of loans to help individuals learn how to prevent them from losing a home. Maybe create something about buying vehicles versus a home via a loan. I thought that was interesting. So thank you for that comment, Barbara. Thank you, Joanna, for your question as well. And thank you, Todd and Dave, for that wonderful information. We really appreciate it. We are going to shift gears now to our next presenter. We have Alexandra Terry with Tohono O'odham to talk to us about Kiki housing. Alexandra.
Skuk and good morning. Shapchugi Alexandra Terry. My name is Alexandra Terry, and I'm very honored and humbled to be requested to present on behalf of the Tohono O'odham Kik Housing Association. Thank you very much to MAG and the partners that you folks work with, especially for your representation and consideration of acknowledgement of tribal lands. Tohono O'odham also has ancestral home sites within the Maricopa County. So we're very pleased that you guys chose to do that. I would like to talk about our success in constructing tribal housing on tribal lands. We had a shift in our appointed administration leadership it's been about a decade now that we came in to the Housing Association in Tohono O'odham. And this is kind of the story of the last 10 years of how we've been able to construct and develop housing. I'm not sure if I have control of the slides or if I just can say slide, if that works. Slide, thank you. So the Tohono O'odham, we are the second largest land-based reservation in the United States, second only to the Dene Nation. We're located throughout Southern Arizona, as well as Pima and Pinal counties. Pinal, Maricopa, in addition to Southern Arizona. The second largest land base, we have 11 districts located throughout, which are demonstrated on the maps. We operate more than 220 rentals and more than 450 current homeownership units. And we have, at the time of this, that we recently increased our formula. But at this time last year, we had about a $4 million annual IHBG allocation through our Indian Housing Plan. But our annual construction operating comes to more than $20 million every fiscal year. So how have we been able to do this over the last decade? We will show you. Slide. Constructing projects throughout our tribal reservation would not be possible. I think there's some animation, so you can go ahead and do the whole. There we go. In 2011, when we came on board, we had numerous stagnant projects on our books that were unable to move forward. There were tremendous challenges with infrastructure and development. The projects at that time just seemed insurmountable. We had hundreds of applicants on the waiting list, and folks just had given up on continuing to update their information on our tribal waiting list because just the time that it takes to get a project going. Unfortunately, people would pass away because they waited so long for housing and without ever realizing their dream of housing. There's more on that slide. We go ahead, there we go. So at that time, Tohono had so many undone projects and funds sitting in our locks account that we were actually in jeopardy. At that time, there was federal legislation to reduce our future IHBG allocations due to the surpluses and unexpended funds and undone projects. But in 2011, we had a shift and we kind of changed the tide on that. Having that many undone projects was very daunting, and especially the need and the hundreds of people on our waiting list. The largest, I think one of the largest challenges was infrastructure with our vast desert reservation land base. It's nearly 2.8 million acres. We're about the size of the state of Connecticut. Next slide. So leveraging resources, this is how we've been able to do everything, and we can go through all the animations. So some of the largest challenges that the nation faced were familial and home sites that had been designated to families. So there were a lot of cultural ties to that land, and although it looked and seemed vacant, a lot of those sites had been designated to members in the community. And under our reservation system, a lot of those allocations are designated to folks in the district. We also had significant, when we first came in, appraisal disparities and comparable sales data. If there's not a market for home sales, how can you effectively appraise a home with no comparable sales data anywhere within 100 miles? Homeowner education was also a significant challenge in that homeowners learning the responsibility to upkeep their own home, roof maintenance, cabinets, flooring, all of those things, combined with traditional homes versus modern home values. Modern amenities such as air conditioning units and how to properly take care of those. In some cases, we had homes that never even had plumbing. So there were a lot of new innovations that we tried to incorporate, especially with insulation and trying to get the best home for still an affordable value, and that we didn't overcharge folks. It's very expensive to build complete new housing construction, especially when there's such a significant lack of infrastructure. You had to start pretty much from even putting in the piping, the plumbing. In many cases, we have to do individual standalone septic systems, and it's very few areas that are able to tie into a larger sewer system. So all of that combined, especially with the limited utility challenges on the nation that can often increase housing prices by nearly 50% in some cases. So the infrastructure alone, not just the vertical construction on the housing, it can be very, very costly. So funding and resources, when there were more than 500 folks on our waiting list that were waiting to be served, and those were just our active homeowner waiting list. We had hundreds more on our waiting list that just simply gave up in updating their applications. But those applications are still kept on file. And if those folks ever do want to update their application, we still honor their application original date. In some cases, we've had folks even come in and update their application that was over 20 years old. So it's very exciting to see those folks finally realizing their dream of home ownership. And then politics, like anywhere else. Next slide. So of our portfolios, and we can go ahead and show everything. Previous to 10 years ago, we had never applied for loans. We never applied for grants. We were very set in only receiving the funds that we got through our formula base through the Indian Housing Plan. And those funds kept getting reduced year after year. So this was a dire problem. How would we essentially construct housing due to our limited funds, and what income would there be, especially if we're not charging rents in excess of 30% of somebody's loan amount. So if a house costs more than $400,000 to construct, how would we build more homes if we're not really charging more than 30%? Next slide. So at that time, we had about $4 million that we received on an annual basis, no grants, no loans, and very, very little income derived from payments. It was even less than 19% 10 years ago, but at that time, I think we were getting about 10% to 19%. And today we have more than $20 million. And I think this year we're up to 24. A lot of our funds are derived through the Arizona State Tax Credit, which is an incredible program. We're very lucky to have that program. That's how we develop a lot of our homes. It does have some challenges. The preference for that would be housing within subdivisions. This is not always a popular option for our tribal communities. Not everybody wants to live in clusters of 30 to 40, 50 homes in one area. So scattered housing, we've really worked with Arizona State to try to increase that to allow for scattered sites within these project areas. HUD, ICDBG, IHBGC competitive. We really want to thank HUD and our community partners through this funding. We call the HUD agency our partners. I think previous federal governments have acted, or government agencies have acted more in a paternalistic sense, but really HUD has been one of the few federal agencies that truly genuinely are our partners in these projects. They come with the technical knowledge and expertise to assist us through self-determination. And it's really up to tribes ourselves to not wait for someone to come in and do these projects. If you don't seize that moment, and no one's coming for you to help. So it really is up to the tribe and HUD with our other partners. This is why we've been able to have so much success. Grant programs, loan programs. Loans are more difficult, especially with collateralization and federal trust lands. We've had a lot of difficulty securing collateral. 184 is a great program, but it again doesn't include the infrastructure costs. So effectively funding those programs, you will have to leverage other sources of funds. Next slide. So again, our non-competitive operating budget roughly in 2012 was about $4.4 million. Less than 3% of those funds total were received through direct payment In 2022, we've been able to leverage more than 75% of our direct project program costs through other outside sources, competitive grants, state housing tax credits, and some loans that we've been able to secure. Title VI, HUD 184, those are great programs. And also I do want to comment on Todd had said for especially many of these programs do have low to moderate income standard guidelines. We've had many cases where I'll give example of one family. They had applied for housing services and the father works at the post office. The mother has a catering food business, and together with even their 3 children, so a household of 5, they don't qualify for HUD low income standards. So we did have to create a moderate higher income based home program, and that was only in the last 2 years, but that is a huge need. And we're also working with Arizona State to help increase those guidelines to not only serve the lowest income households. Next slide. So again, healthy financial portfolio budgeting when limited resources. We absolutely were unable to fund any of our direct construction projects without these loans and grants and investments in our community with our community partners. Matching resources with in-kind, such as land or staff and value, were also very essential. And even if you can't build out a full project, if your full project is more than 100 units, phase those projects out. This is how we've been able to successfully develop hundreds of homes over just this 10-year period. And we're coming into a bear market when resources are becoming limited. We're really going to be looking to our partners, especially Native Community Capital and others that can help us to best leverage the resources we have so we can continue to build these projects and not pass on these extreme costs to our homeowners who are still struggling to pay larger fees in every sense. Just living on the reservation, especially where we live, in some cases, it can take folks up to just 60 miles one way to get to a grocery store. Everything is more expensive, the gas, the food. So we're trying to keep our housing costs still very low despite the rising costs for development and construction. These are significant challenges, and we do need our partners at this time. Next slide. Oh, there's some drawbacks to this. There's a lot of strings attached when building projects, but especially we like to, oh, that's okay. Conforming to the needs of our partners, and of course compromises, just like everything you have to, when you go and take a loan from a bank, you have to adhere to their reporting requirements, and we don't always agree, but this is, those are the rules attached to borrowing. So next slide. And especially when you're working with federal agencies or other partners, everybody likes to see the results. So we definitely try to keep our stats, jobs created, how many houses we've built, how much infrastructure has been developed. HUD likes to call it outputs and outcomes. This absolutely helps with showing what you can do and your capacity to build and develop. The picture on the slide is actually our new community recreation center and fitness center, and the first ever large splash pad on the Tohono O'odham Nation. We are very proud of this project. This is nearly fully funded with ICDBG funds from 2020. Director Moses, we're going to be very excited to have you out for hopefully this grand opening this summer. The community is extremely excited. This coincides with our 2019 tax credit project. There are more than 45 homes in this area, and there's no community facilities within a 60-mile radius. This will be a tremendous community partnership investment. Folks are very excited to have. So our homes in this area are nearly all occupied. We also, this is the district that we have in Hanamcook of Gaachi. It's our first market rate rental project as well. So folks that previously wanted to rent and they were not considered low income, we did get a HUD 184 grant to build townhome, or 184 loan, excuse me, to build townhomes in this area as well. Next slide. So again, showing results is extremely important. How we're able to build these homes and who we're able to employ, developing infrastructure is one of the greatest advantages to this. So we're looking hopefully to more investments in infrastructure coming soon with ARP monies that have recently come down. We're going to be building with the new ARP monies that TOCA just received a large community water sanitation pipeline. It's going to effectively bring water to, I would say, at least 3 villages and communities on the reservation. So it's a tremendous investment. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time, a lot of environmental clearances, but construction is breaking ground in April. We're very excited. Next slide. And so this is kind of the end results of these happy homeowners. On the left, I think you can see one of our technicians going through an air conditioning unit and showing residents how to change the filters, how to keep the air at a moderate temperature, especially during the very, very hot summer months. Previous to 10 years ago, there were no air conditioning units within any of our HUD units. Everything had been developed on swamp coolers, which have been shown over time to not be as healthy and have some mold effects and issues, much more costly to maintain and over time. So we have switched to AC. I think there's one more slide. Oh, that's it. This is the symbol of the Tohono O'odham Nation. From birth to death, we believe it's the paths in our lives that will define our character. So thank you very much for this time. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was wonderful. I think it's particularly great to see the families in their homes to really show the story. That's just wonderful. Does not look like we have any questions in the Q&A, and we have one chat. There's a chat saying, what a wonderful, it says, what a wonderful study to give the story of what's possible for other tribes. There are more of you, are there more of you that can work with communities to teach this, is what I'm assuming Barbara's trying to say there. You seem to like your job too. And she goes on, I'll let you read the comment, it's kind. So thank you very much, Alex, we appreciate it. And if there are additional questions, we will have time at the end of the webinar to go ahead and go through those. Please feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A section. And now we will welcome our final speaker for today's webinar, Jody Moses with the Southwest Office of HUD. Jody, thanks so much for being here.
Oops. Thank you so much. It is absolutely my pleasure to be here today. Alexandra, I am looking forward to attending the grand opening this summer of the community facility. Being summer, you will likely find me on the splash pad, by the way. So thank you to the Maricopa Association of Governments for the opportunity to participate today. And a very special thank you to all the tribal nation partners and attendees who have made the time to attend this event in support of this important topic. It is also my pleasure to present alongside Alexandra, Todd, and Dave today. I also want to thank you, Dave, for highlighting some of the amazing work that has been accomplished through CDFI programs, which ultimately provides Native American families and individuals with safe, sound, and affordable housing. I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge some of the work that remains to be done. In addition, great presentation, Alexandra. I really really credit and really enjoyed kind of the from to approach, acknowledging challenges and how the Kiki Housing Association has overcome those. So thank you so much. Certainly, the Kiki Housing Association is a leader in the provision of housing in Indian country and an exemplary example of housing outcomes in serving the community. And as you said, we at HUD like the word outcomes. My name is Jody Moses. I am the Southwest Office of Native American Programs Administrator. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Just to give a little overview, if you will, for those of you that may not be familiar with our office. Our main office is located in Phoenix, Arizona, and we also have an office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Southwest Office of Native American Programs serves the entire Southwest region, and that includes California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. We serve approximately 141 active tribal grantees. That fluctuates depending on grant applications and awards, of course, but generally around 140 to 150 grantees, tribal grantees at any given time, to include tribes and tribally designated housing entities. SWONAP really comes from a position of support and technical assistance. We currently serve 22 tribes and tribally designated housing entities right here in Arizona. And I did want to comment to an earlier question about technical assistance, and thank you. I think it was Dave that talked about HUD's capacity to coordinate technical assistance specifically to the question around development. Although we don't work with private developers per se, we can coordinate technical assistance around specific development projects on behalf of the tribe or tribally designated housing entities. So please reach out to myself or your specialist if you are working with one of our grant specialists at SWONAP, and we can certainly coordinate that for you. As I said, SWONAP is committed to supporting the self-determination of our tribal partners and their tribally designated housing entities to accomplish their specific housing goals, and has already been mentioned, is in fact that tribal housing initiatives and outcomes are self-determined. So SWONAP is here, again, comes from a position of support and technical assistance. Although we do have a compliance arm, again, it's really in the nature of support to ensure that regulatory and statutory guidelines are met. I would also be remiss to some earlier points if I did not acknowledge that there is the need for increased appropriations around NAHASDA for funding to keep up with inflation and rising construction costs. I am pleased to say that the fiscal year 2022 appropriations did increase some, and for the first time in Indian country exceed the HUD Native American programs funding exceeds $1 billion. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of the HUD Native American programs offered. Some have been mentioned already. I also am putting in the chat right now the link to HUD Code Talk, which is where you can find specific program information as well as resources like the list of HUD-approved lenders and housing counseling agencies that was mentioned in an earlier presentation. I'd like to start first with the Indian Housing Block Grant Program, or IHBG as it's commonly known. This is a formula grant that provides a range of affordable housing activities on Indian reservations and in Indian areas. The block grant approach to housing for Native Americans was enabled by the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996, also known as NAHASDA. Eligible IHBG recipients are federally recognized Indian tribes or their tribally designated housing entity. Each year, recipients of the Indian Housing Block Grant submit an Indian housing plan, again speaking to the self-determination, to receive funding and also complete an annual performance report. And to Alexandra's point, that is where we often look for outcomes and outputs. Eligible activities are quite vast. Some have been highlighted in the presentations today, but they include, in addition to housing development, assistance to housing development developed under the Indian Housing Program, housing services to eligible families and individuals, crime prevention and safety, and model activities that provide creative approaches to solving affordable housing challenges. Next is the IHBG competitive grant. So unlike the IHBG formula, which is an appropriation to based on a formula to each eligible tribe or tribal entity, the competitive is part of a consolidated appropriations act where Congress provides for this additional funding for competitive grants to eligible IHBG recipients authorized under NAHASDA. And this IHBG competitive, of course, is in addition to the formula-based funding. Priority is given to projects that spur construction that will increase the number of housing units, rehabilitation that will increase the useful life of existing affordable housing, acquisition of existing housing units that increase housing stock, and of course, necessary housing-related infrastructure projects, all while considering need and administrative capacity. The IHBG competitive, as you can probably note in my description of eligible activities, is very specific or pointed to unit outcomes and longevity of existing units. The IHBG competitive grant is awarded on a rated system, meeting certain requirements and guidelines. Next, the Indian Community Development Block Grant. I know Alexandra mentioned that this was the bulk of the funding for their community facility, which is really exciting. The ICDBG program provides eligible grantees with direct grants for use in developing viable Indian and Alaska Native communities, including decent housing, suitable living environments, and economic opportunities, and is primarily for low to moderate income persons, as are most, if not all, of the HUD Native American programs. Projects funded by the ICDBG program must principally benefit low and moderate income persons. The ICDBG program provides for two categories of grants. First is our single purpose grant, which is awarded on a competitive basis pursuant to the terms published in the NOFO announcing the grant funding availability. The second category of grant under ICDBG is the imminent threat grants. This grant is slightly different in that the Secretary of HUD may set aside up to $4 million of each year's allocation, ICDBG allocation, for the non-competitive first come, first serve funding. Funding of grants under the imminent threat are essentially to eliminate or lessen problems which pose an imminent threat to public health or safety of tribal residents. Over the last couple of years, we have had here in the Southwest a handful of grantees awarded imminent threat grants, some in the instance of disaster, for example. The next category of grant funding I'd like to go over today, and again, these are brief. There is additional information, and of course, I'm open to questions after the presentation. But the next two categories, or the next category, which has two funding sources, are related to the COVID pandemic. The first is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act of 2020, also known as the CARES Act. And the second is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, also known as ARP or ARPA. Both of these grants are unique in that they're extremely flexible, and as long as the proposed activity or the activity is used to prepare for, prevent, or respond to COVID-19 pandemic, that is really the priority eligible use, if you will. These funds were intended to be deployed quickly, and I think I can say with confidence that for the most part that was accomplished on the part of HUD and the Southwest Office of Native American Programs, and also to provide the flexibility to tribal nations and tribally designated housing entities to use these funds specific to the needs of their community. So flexibility in utilizing these funds has been significant and well needed across the communities. Also, the next program is our HUD Tribal VASH. This is currently a demonstration, if you will, but HUD, in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs, has a tribal HUD VASH program to offer a permanent home and supportive services to Native American veterans who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. The Tribal HUD VA Supportive Housing Program, Tribal HUD VASH, provides rental assistance as well as wraparound or supportive services to Native American veterans. And this can include on the reservation or near a reservation or other Indian areas. This program has historically been somewhat underutilized, but is continuing to grow. We are likely going to, I don't have a timeline yet, but I am confident in saying that we will have another expansion NOFO out at some point in the near future, expanding the HUD Tribal VASH program in the effort to award more grantees around the HUD Tribal VASH. This is a unique program in that through this partnership with the Veterans Administration, not only does the program provide for housing, but also those supportive services and case management that are often the missing component of funding programs. Title VI, which has been mentioned a couple of times today, and I'm so pleased to hear that, is really a leveraging program, if you will, as was mentioned. Title VI is an effective public investment tool that HUD offers to federally recognized tribes and tribally designated housing entities. And as was demonstrated earlier today, it provides an additional source of financing for affordable tribal housing activities. Like many of our programs, it can be used to create new housing, rehabilitate housing, build infrastructure, construct community facilities, acquire land to be used for housing, planning to include preparing architectural and engineering plans, fund financing costs, which is quite unique and I think was demonstrated through a couple of examples today. The real purpose of the Title VI Loan Guarantee Program is to assist IHBG recipients, and under this program called borrowers, who want to finance additional grant eligible construction or development at today's current costs. Tribes can use a variety of funding sources in combination with Title VI financing that include low-income housing tax credits. Title VI loans may also be used to pay development costs. I think the flexibility, and again, I think as was demonstrated in Alexandra's presentation, as well as mentioned earlier, due to the flexibility of the Title VI program, tribes can really structure their loans to meet the requirements of the project and use this program to negotiate a variety of repayment terms with the lender of their choice. And as was said, it's not always when it comes to reporting or terms, sometimes there isn't the opportunity to negotiate, but Title VI program does allow for that and leaves that flexibility to the tribal entity as the borrower to do so. Loan terms under Title VI can range up to 20 years, and payments can be made monthly, quarterly, or annually. Additionally, and something I think is amazing about the Title VI program is interest rates can be fixed, adjustable, or floating, and are based on an index. Again, really giving the borrower, the tribal borrower, the flexibilities that are best suited to their needs. Lastly, the Section 184 Loan Guarantee Program. I know many of you are likely familiar with this. The Section 184 Indian Home Loan Guarantee Program is essentially a home mortgage product specifically designed for American Indian and Alaska Native families, Alaska villages, tribes, or tribally designated housing entities. There is a bit of confusion, not necessarily amongst the group here today, that the Section 184 is a mortgage in and of itself, and it is not. It is a guarantee to the lender making the loan that if it essentially assures the lender that its investment will be repaid in full in the event of a foreclosure or something like that. So it's really a tool, or a guarantee, as it's called, to broaden capacity and ability for Native American individuals, families, tribes, and tribally designated housing entities to purchase, construct, etc., homes on and off tribal lands. The Section 184 program has proven to be extremely effective. For example, tribally designated housing entities that, as was demonstrated today, either as a second component to a development in terms of borrowers, getting a 184 loan to purchase a home in a development, but also for tribes and tribal entities to use the 184 loan to actually complete or to construct a new housing development. Right, so that kind of wraps up my brief overview of the HUD Office of Native American Programs. Again, I have put a link to our website, HUD Code Talk, which is an amazing resource and has more information on each of these programs. But again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions now or later. Next slide, please. And next slide. Great, thank you. Here you'll find some contact information for myself, as well as Deputy Administrator Cheryl Dixon-Zuni. We have, many of you may know that the Southwest Office of Native American Programs has two divisions. We have grants management, which grants management, we essentially work with our tribal partners on the day-to-day. And then we have grants evaluation, which is more of the compliance arm. But again, we come from a position of support and technical assistance. I did want to take a quick opportunity, although not mentioned as one of the HUD ONAP programs. HUD has partnered with Treasury to be the provider or the coordinator for the provision of technical assistance around the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. I think there was some confusion around that initially of how to establish those programs within the housing entities or tribal divisions. So if there is need for technical assistance around the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, SWONAP is your contact for that, and we'd be more than happy to coordinate technical assistance around that program, as well as a myriad of other subjects and topics. So thank you. That's my presentation today.
Thank you so much, Jody. That was wonderful. We really appreciate you being here and sharing this information. We will also be providing our panelists' contact information in the resource guide that all who have registered for the webinar will receive after the webinar, along with our webinar survey. I don't see any additional questions in either the chat or the Q&A. If you do have any questions for Jody or any of our other panelists, please feel free to enter those now and we can have them addressed. All right, I'm not seeing anything come through. I once again want to thank all four of our presenters today and our partners at the Arizona Community Foundation for their support of this work. We hope this information was helpful to increase affordable housing on tribal lands across Arizona and elsewhere. If you do have questions or concerns about future webinars that we could possibly host on this topic, we are all ears and we look forward to receiving your feedback in this survey. We'll just make sure this last chat.
I'm happy to answer that, Kelly.
Okay.
So David and others, the ACF pre-development loan, affordable housing pre-development loan, is designed to help support pre-development needs of our nonprofit developers. So the Arizona Community Foundation works directly with LISC, and LISC helps underwrite the projects. We've worked with a number of different nonprofit organizations across the state, including the Foundation for Senior Living, Catholic Charities, Native American Connections, CPLC, and many others, as they have worked on new affordable housing projects. We provide the pre-development loans that are needed before they get their LIHTC funding. So that includes loans in a range of $75,000 to $200,000 that are no interest rate loans, that are designed for them to get all the necessary requisite materials pulled together before they get their LIHTC funding. So if they have NEPA requirements, if they have to do architectural renderings, if they have to get the engineering studies done, that's what those loans are for. We also have a new fund that was recently granted to us by Chase, JP Morgan Chase, for additional projects. Those are within Maricopa County, but they are designed to similarly provide repayable grants to organizations when they're in the pre-development stage, or when they're in the mid stage of a development and need some extra capital. And so, or for preservation projects, we can also support those. So feel free to reach out to me, Debbie, or anyone at LISC if you are interested in those types of funds, and we're happy to help and provide some guidance.
Well, you specifically mentioned that that's available for nonprofit developers. Tribes aren't technically nonprofits, but they are essentially nonprofit. Are they eligible to apply?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can provide them to nonprofit organizations. I should have clarified that. Municipalities, tribal nations, or educational institutions.
And what tribes have used these funds to date?
So to date, we have worked through nonprofit organizations only. The nonprofit developers have been the ones who have been using these particular funds. They are deployed, as I mentioned, through a referral from LISC. So LISC basically works with the nonprofit developers and underwrites the project, and then comes to us for the pre-development loan. However, We're happy to talk with you about, how can we best coordinate this effort? How do we work? If we need to work through lists, great. If we don't, if we can work directly through other tribal entities, we're happy to explore that as well.
Great. And are there funds set aside for tribes, or is it first come, first serve?
They're repayable funds. So we have two basic funds at about $5 million total, and they go in and out of the system all the time. So there are times when the fund is low and we have to, pause a little bit, but we are always getting those funds repaid, as we used to call them repayable grants, but we started calling them loans. They're 0 interest rate loans, but as soon as they get repaid, then we're able to deploy them back out. So it's really just a matter of the availability of the funds at any given time.
Great. Alex, have you looked at this fund? Is this something that you all have used, and what's your experience with it?
Is this the LISC, Lisa?
We work through LISC. It's
Through
the
LISC.
Arizona Community Foundation Pre-Development Housing Fund.
I'm not, we may have, Dave. I think we did work, there was another opportunity. I think Todd mentioned it earlier, bonds. We got pretty far along with the bonds. I would say maybe halfway with our LISC applications. And I think collateral really came into play quite a bit. It pretty much, in addition to the land being difficult to collateralize on, I think there's a lot of questions when it comes to folks working with tribes and especially the trust land and foreclosure issues. So that's just really, to put it simply. I know they're much more complex, but I don't think we got further than the collateralization of these loan potentials. So I think that's where we got, because they look to I think we've got some money set aside in stocks and bonds, and you can only collateralize those so many times before people are like, oh, you've got 3 other folks looking at that you can't capitalize it too many times, but then you look to land. So after that, we're like, well, we've got other sources. They're not as complex. But we do like to work with partner agencies just to help them work through working on tribal lands. It's really important. I think one of the biggest issues with outside agencies is how do they collateralize those loans? So I think that's where Native Community Capital can really come in and help and work with these partner agencies to, show how, if something comes to default, how can they collect and capitalize?
Yeah, that's come up a lot in terms of, lenders or other partners feeling like they can't collateralize the land because it's held in trust, but we can do that through a leasehold, mortgage and leasehold. And the other thing I was concerned about was, if LISC is involved, I'd attempted to work through LISC National, and there seemed to be a hesitance to work outside of metro areas. There's LISC and there's rural LISC. And LISC as an organization nationwide received $1 billion of Fortune 50, grant dollars for COVID relief. And I don't know that any of it went to Indian country. So I'm really interested to see how LISC has been performing. If there is a rural LISC element that is active in Arizona, although we value the LISC partners in the metro area, where our needs are in rural areas of the state. So I'll be interested to explore that more.
Absolutely, Dave. And Dave, I'm happy to schedule that time with LISC and you and me to have this conversation. And they do work with us statewide. We have a number of projects that we've done across the state. However, if it's not doable through LISC, we are flexible. We want to work with our tribal communities. We want to support your needs and aspirations. And so I'm sure we can find a way.
Thank you. 0% sounds fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For the panelists, we do have a question that's come up from Alan Chavez. He says, how do individual villages apply for grants away from the tribal government?
I can try to work with this if that. So Tohono O'odham Nation has 11 officially recognized districts that somewhat act as states of the larger federal government system, which is the Tohono O'odham Nation. Within the 11 districts, we have roughly 77 officially recognized communities or villages within those. Some of the villages and communities have systems of land designation and requirements more than others. So just my rough experience, not knowing exactly what you guys have as far as your villages, I think the number one demonstration need, not just for HUD, but for even loans or other sources of funding, would be probably the capacity of your village or community. Does it have an accounting system? Have you done audits before? Have you received funds? How are you going to financially account for those funds? And I would say probably 75%, and that's pretty common on a HUD application, is just 100% of the capacity. So if you can't get a C+ or higher on your capacity, if you don't have a proper accounting system, auditing, financial reporting, I think those are the first key steps in order for a village or a community to receive funds.
Yeah, I would second that. Whether you're a district or a village or a chapter on the Navajo Nation, these are typically small communities that have limited capacity. But when you use other people's money, even grant money, you agree to play by their rules. And usually what that means is that you have to have some kind of designation up at Navajo, maybe that might be a LGA, Local Governments Act designation. Other tribes and communities might have other designations, a 501c3 designation. If you don't have a 501c3 designation, then you would probably need to have some kind of fiscal sponsor. And that's all because, again, especially for grant funds, the idea is we want these funds to be used for a legitimate purpose, and we have to have some kind of verification that there is a formal body that will have oversight of these dollars and then is eligible to receive them. So I think if you're not formed, if you don't have a corporate identity, maybe Section 17, there are a number of different vehicles that you can use to get established. And if you don't, then there's always the possibility of getting a corporate sponsor or that's not the right term, a fiscal sponsor, excuse me, to help manage those dollars as they come to you and as you get established. That is, as a matter of fact, it's going to be closing soon, but the Department of Treasury, which is one of our funding sources, has a CDFI program, and you don't have to be established necessarily to get $150,000 in funding for operating capital or other activities, but you do need to have a sponsoring entity that is established, and they understand that over time you will get established. So it's a process, and we encourage you to look at the options that you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. I do not see any additional questions in either the chat or the Q&A. So with that, I will once again thank our panelists and our partners at the Arizona Community Foundation. And again, we will be sending out everyone's contact information and a resource guide. And we hope to continue this conversation with future webinars with your feedback in the survey. So thank you on behalf of MAG and everybody who participated today. We're very thankful that you were here, and we hope that this information will be helpful in increasing the access to affordable housing on tribal lands in Arizona. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.